Very
So,
cool.
this is our first official time meeting. We actually did get to see you in person at the grand opening of the Amen Clinics here in Scottsdale, but you were a couple seats behind us. And when we realized it was you, you were answering a question
Mm,
or giving an introduction as Dr. Amen introduced you as one of the um, should I say clinicians, doctors of the Amen Clinics, because this is a new clinic here in Scottsdale.
mhm.
So will you actually tell our listeners what the Amen Clinics is?
Yeah. So the Amen Clinics, I mean, first and foremost is a mental health clinic, but we pride ourselves on doing things very differently from kind of the traditional mental health model, right? Where you go in, you sit down with a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner or a PA or whatever, and they ask you questions. How are you feeling? Depression, anxiety, ADHD. Run down the gamut, and then based off of your responses, they go, okay, you meet criteria for depression, and here's an antidepressant that hopefully should work, and maybe it doesn't, and often it does, right? So it's not to talk bad about the current mental health system, but we try to do things a little bit better. And I think the first thing that we do, and the kind of the core with Dr. Amen and everybody that works with Dr. Amen, and really believes in the direction that he would like to see mental health go, is that we look at the organ we're treating, and that organ is the brain. Now, neurologists have been looking at the brain for a long time, right? They do an MRI and they go, "Oh, there's a tumor," or "Oh, you got a stroke," or they look at the structure of the brain and then are sometimes able to use that information to diagnose things. But psychiatrists say we don't really get that opportunity, because a lot of times what we're looking at is really the mind, right? And that's a harder thing to draw a picture of, because it can be not just the structure, but also the way that structure is functioning. So how the neurotransmitters, the way things are wired, and it's only been in the last handful of years that we've even been able to start to look at the function and the activity of the brain in any way that would I don't know, be useful in any way, like to clinicians, that anybody would really give a damn about, and that has clinical relevance, and is also at least affordable, right? Because up until very recently, the only way you could get a functional imaging study of the brain was usually in some big ass university somewhere as part of some research project, right, in some research lab, and so that's been really helpful, and as a psychiatrist who was trained in the traditional way of doing things, the same way that Abraham Lincoln was diagnosed with depression, 150 plus years ago, um, is, using our SPECT scans, looking at the brain, looking at the functional activity of the brain. And I can absolutely say that it is a game changer in how I am able to talk to my patients about, how I am able to diagnose, how I'm able to treat, whether that be with medications or the whole other gamut of awesome options that I think working with the Amen Clinic has made me much more aware of. Things like neurofeedback, things like hyperbaric oxygen therapy, things like, integrative medicine and nutraceuticals, and diet and nutrition, right? The role that a lot of this stuff can really play in our mental health. Um, that of course we as Americans, we always want the quick fix. It's easier to just take a pill and hope it makes us better than to put work into actually, making those permanent changes. But yeah, I think that's really the big thing, right? Is we look at the brain. We use SPECT imaging, which is a functional imaging modality, to look at the activity of the brain, and then we use that information in our assessment, diagnosis, and treatment. So that's number one. And then I think the other thing that we do that's very different from the traditional model is time, right? A patient comes into us, they are going to spend time with the SPECT scans, they're going to spend time doing psychological testing, they're going to spend 2 hours with a historian to gain a whole lot of information about what's going on, and then they're going to spend, an hour and a half to 2 hours with me at the end of all of that, where I've already looked at their history, I've already looked at their spec scans, already looked at the testing. And so then we just get to spend time together talking about things, connecting, building rapport, um, validating, right? That's the other thing about spec scans and being able to actually see it is it helps take mental um, mental issues, with mental illness. I know Dr. Amen doesn't like that term. He likes brain health, conditions, right? But it does. It helps transform what's going on from this characterologic flaw in, oh, am I a bad person? Am I a piece of shit? Am I lazy? Am I this? Am I that? Or my husband is, or this is, and all of the judgments and biases that come along with mental illness, and objectify it into a brain health issue that can be really powerful for people, right? It can, and how they feel about themselves and about how their families feel about them and their struggles, right? And that alone can, I think, probably carries more weight, as far as treatment's concerned, than any medication I can throw at you.
Give them an answer. Yeah, it's validating. And I think something that I'm seeing on social media within the last couple of years is a lot of like moms and dads getting diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, being on the spectrum in some sort, and like breathing a deep breath saying, I finally have answers. I suspected something was wrong, but no one was ever able to tell me. And just how much relief that is for them to have answers to what they know as quirks or things that they were quote unquote doing wrong, or they were the oddball. So it is very cool to see the clinic and its capabilities.
I think we were most blown away by the imagery, because I honestly didn't even know. I knew Doc Amen was the doc of the celebs,
the TikTok doc.
Didn't really know the work that he's been doing for so many years now, and to see real life stories of what people's brains actually look like. As a mom, I was sitting in the audience being like, this is going to provide so many families answers that they're questioning, because you can look at your kiddo and be like, man, maybe he is a little anxious, or maybe he does have ADHD, or okay, well, let's go get him checked out. And to be able to verify it, like truly verify your inclinations through a brain scan versus just someone telling you what you're basically telling them, like, yeah, your son
I'm anxious.
does.
Yeah, you have anxiety disorder, right?
You do.
Yeah.
I think that's such a gift that these scans offer, and why we felt so compelled to bring you onto the podcast today, because more families need to know about these clinics, because it is going to be a game changer for just those big questions that can keep you up at night as a parent.
Well, and I think on the other side of that, one of our running jokes now between us is that person just needs a brain scan, right? It's literally like, I can't get annoyed with people. I can't, because there's so much that goes into it. I mean, it's trauma, it's screens, it's lack of sleep, it's diet. So what you painted the picture of was really a holistic approach that your clinic goes through, right? They don't just get a brain scan and you ship them out the door.
Right.
You get a brain scan with, you talk to a historian, you talk to you go then to talk to you. If there's supplementation that's needed, it's not necessarily a drug, which again, drugs aren't a bad thing, but we don't necessarily want to take that as the first line of defense. It should be the last line of defense. In our experience,
drugs are band-aids. And very few of our psychiatric drugs, right? And I'm a believer in drugs. I prescribe them commonly. Like, I know that they can be powerful tools, and especially when I have the SPECT imaging to guide my choice of drug, right? Makes it even more powerful. But very few psychiatric drugs, just like very few drugs in general, actually fix anything. They just put a band-aid on it, right? They correct it for a short period of time and they make it better. But once that drug is gone, it's just like a blood pressure medication. You can take a blood pressure medication and your blood pressure can be good. But once you stop taking that blood pressure medication, unless you've made diet changes, unless you've lost weight, unless you've corrected whatever underlying issue was causing that blood pressure to go up, your blood pressure is just going to be high again. So, medications are powerful tools, but they don't really fix anything.
Right.
And we need to forget about just sticking people on medications and leaving them there potentially indefinitely
Forever.
because it's an easy solution, and really work with our patients. And you don't need a SPECT scan to do this. You don't. The thing, and that's the other thing, though. You don't need a SPECT scan to be a good psychiatrist or a good doctor. Just remembering that you should be there to help patients fix the underlying issues, not just cover them up with medications.
Right.
If you can keep that in mind and always prescribe a medication, hopefully with an exit strategy for that medication in most cases. Now, if you have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, there may be times when a person is kind of destined to be on medications for the indefinite future. But barring those cases, most of our patients don't necessarily need them lifelong.
Right.
And we have to try to remember that they're only Band-Aids, and that we need to be helping our patients fix the underlying issues that are causing those problems, whether that be unresolved trauma, whether that be lifestyle issues, whether that be difficulties with stress management, whether that be substance abuse issues. One that's a big passion of mine, because it's a dragon that I've chased my whole life, and is sleep. Right? We as a country don't sleep. It's this whole sleep when you're dead mentality.
Mhm.
And there's been really good research to show, very recent research and big studies to show that more than diet, more than exercise, the best thing that we can do to improve our quality of life and improve the amount of time we get to spend on this floating ball of rock in the sky is sleep.
Yeah.
It's the best thing we can do for ourselves. And so if we're dealing with untreated sleep apnea or just poor sleep hygiene, especially in our kiddos, our teenagers, none of them want to sleep anymore. They're too busy TikToking, and with
On a
phones and
screen.
everything
Right.
else. Right? It's sleep is an epidemic in this country,
Yeah.
or lack thereof.
Yeah.
The
But
last statistic we read on sleep was that 15% of teenagers get the recommended amount of sleep.
Mhm.
Yeah.
oh yeah, yeah,
So
I believe it.
I have a question for I'm gonna play the new listener learning about the Amen Clinic,
Mhm.
and they're tuning into this episode and they're like, wow, this is really interesting. Do I need to have an issue to come and get scanned? So what are the most common what are the most common types of people or children that you see in your clinic that come and see you? Because what you just said, you don't have to have schizophrenia or bipolar. If you have anxiety or a sleep problem, can you come in and see in your brain scan that there's a problem?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wish I could, and who knows, maybe 20 more years down the road, um, it'll be better. But unfortunately, SPECT scans don't all, even though they can show us an issue, they don't necessarily tell us exactly why that thing's going on, right?
Or maybe define what shows up in a
But
spec scan. I think
yeah,
that would be really helpful.
yeah. But I mean, well, to go back to the first part of your question, I think anybody that wants to learn more about their brain, wants to learn more about how they operate, and about this 4-pound lump of flesh that makes them human, right? uh, can come in and potentially benefit. The other thing I think is important is, just like I tell all of my patients and myself, there's if you think there's nothing wrong with you, that's one of the biggest things that's wrong with you. And
Come get scanned. Got it.
we can all benefit from learning more about ourselves. We can all benefit from maybe doing some psychotherapy, right? Anybody can benefit from therapy. Anybody can benefit from change, right? I mean, that's the beautiful thing about life, is if we embrace change and we embrace the fact that we're all human and we can make mistakes and we can learn and grow. So I think anybody could come into the Amen Clinic and walk away with something valuable that they can take and hopefully improve their life and improve the life of their families, right? But common things being common, I, as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I see adults too, and I'm board certified in adults also, but I see a lot of ADHD, and ADHD is really cool because you can see ADHD on a brain scan. It's really interesting. I mean, it looks like, when you're looking at the front part of the brain, especially when you're looking at it from like underneath and you're looking at the bottom of the brain, um, often ADHD, especially if it's not well treated or managed, it'll look like two big giant holes, like right above where your eyes would be in the
Wow.
front part of the brain. And what we'll typically see is that it'll be better at rest, and then during periods of concentration, when you're trying to step on the mental gas pedal, it'll sputter out, and those areas will get worse. They should get better, but they get worse, and that's a picture of the pathophysiology of ADHD. Makes it really easy to diagnose it. It also makes it easy to pick it apart from the cognitive issues that can come from things like depression and anxiety. So that's really helpful information. So that's one. Anxiety and depression, PTSD, right? These are common in the population. PTSD, way more common than it should be, and unfortunately, and I don't see that letting up anytime soon. But typically, we'll see when we look at the deeper parts of the brain and we're looking at the emotional system of the brain, the limbic system, we'll often see those areas very lit up. We'll see, if there's a lot of anxiety, we'll typically see a lot of activity in these big spots that kind of sit on each side of the brain called the basal ganglia. If we're seeing a lot of depression, we'll typically see like right in the center of the brain, like there's a big old guy called the thalamus in the deeper part of the limbic system, and often we'll see a lot of activity there, and a number of things. And then typically, if we see a kind of general lighting up of that whole area, and we start digging, we can usually tie that into trauma, because what we know about physical trauma, sexual trauma, emotional, psychological trauma, especially if it happens in the younger years when our brains are still developing, it can wire the brain and the limbic system to become really chronically hyperactive, which can cause a host of potentially lifelong symptoms if it's not identified and properly treated. And then the other one that we see a lot of, either as a standalone thing or in people with all of these other issues, is traumatic brain injury, right? We all go through life and we all conk our noggin. We get into car accidents. We do fall off of slides. We get drunk and do all sorts of dumb crap that we barely
We do?
remember the next day.
Us? Ooh.
I don't know. Do you?
Not really anymore. Not since meeting
Right.
Dr. Raymond.
Yeah.
It makes that nightcap or that after work beer a little bit harder to want to put the drink out.
Really?
Yeah.
True.
He lays it on thick, man.
That's funny.
But he does it for all the right reasons.
He really does.
Absolutely.
He's got a heart of gold. I've got two thoughts. So for those of you who are a visual learner, this is looking at the difference between what we saw as kids with the egg in the frying pan, saying that this was your brain on drugs. Like, that was the pictorial that we all had. It might have made you want to eat breakfast. It might have impacted you. I don't know. But the brain scans they have now, it looks like a clock, and it's got like 12 different brains around the clock, and it's an ADHD brain. It's a brain with dementia, it's a brain with Parkinson's, and you can actually see it based on colors. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you said in an ADHD brain, you can see almost two holes if you're looking at it from the bottom. They're not actually holes in the brain, are they?
No. And I tell that to all of my patients
Right.
before I pull out a scan. I said, listen, this is a functional scan, not a structural scan like an MRI. So if we see areas of your brain where it looks like there's dents or there's missing tissue or there's holes, like, you don't have holes in your brain. Or it's all still there, it's still alive, it's fine.
That's
It's
important,
just-
because I would be like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I started making sure that disclaimer got there initially after having a patient like when I first started, and they're like, do I have holes in my brain?
Okay, so the
Yes.
follow-up to that thought then is, you said something really important that I want to dig a little deeper on. You said if trauma whether it's physical, sexual,
For
verbal,
sure.
emotional, happens in the younger years. We really like to impart this on the parents that we work with in terms of the brain not being fully developed. And if certain things happen, or the way something is said, or if something is imparted on that, potentially ever, like you said, it's wired that way. We wire it. So we're wiring, we're firing, we're creating neural pathways. Is that something, I know the answer, but I want to stay here. Is that something that can be rewired? So with psychiatric help, with a change in, medicine, or if it's drugs or supplements, is that something that trauma can be reworked and then rewired so we can refire the natural response?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent. Now, you know, unfortunately, I sometimes you can never. I don't know if you can ever get back 100% in everybody. Excuse me, a little froggy in my throat. But yes, we know, right? We've known for a long time that psychotherapy, even before we get into all the cool space agey stuff that we have now with like neurofeedback and some of these other technology assisted options, um, good old fashioned psychotherapy, if done with a good therapist and done in the right way, has a remarkable chance to um, help rewire the brain, and actually impart long term, long lasting changes. Um, then that's one thing. And when we see a lot of that, right, there's a lot of psychotherapies that are more specifically used to address trauma. We think of like EMDR, CBT for trauma. There's a handful of them. We also see a lot of residential programs and dialectical behavioral therapy and some of these other treatment modalities that are meant to kind of help address and rewire the consequences of the trauma, which can be fragile sense of self, self-harming behaviors, chronic depression and anxiety, difficulty with instability in relationships. Um, excuse me. My gosh, I'm
Get
sorry.
yourself a drink of water.
I
That's
know.
okay.
Get that froggy out of your throat.
Take a sip. Take a sip. That's right.
Is there
But
water in there? No.
yeah, until I'm choking to death on my water, then we really have a problem. But yes, there's so many things that we can do to help. I think the trick is recognizing it, validating it, and then having the systems in place to then address it. And those, as you guys, probably are aware, and a lot of your listeners, it sounds based off of what I'm hearing, you know, the understand the importance of when the treatment's done, right? When the kiddo, the person is going home, or what does that look like too, right? It's because we know that all of the therapy and medications and programs in the world might not do a whole heck of a lot if you are continuing to live in a stressful, chaotic, potentially traumatizing, unstable situation, or you don't have an adequate support system in place, right? I think if I can't say I think, because I the research, there's lots of research to show this, but I would not want to be pressed to just start throwing articles out right now online during our interview. But I think if we really wanted to spend our money wisely when we think about how we could help our future, I think really trying to help restabilize the family systems in this country and revamp our foster care system, which is not great,
Right.
is something where we could, if we want the most bang for our buck for the future of our kiddos, for the future of our country, you know, these are the places that we should be really spending our money and putting work into, because again, until we're able to reverse some of this stuff and we're able to pull these kids and pull people out of these very chaotic, unstable, damaging situations, you can keep throwing money at their mental health care, you can keep doing all of these things, but how much is that really going to change?
It's a Band-Aid again.
Right. Well, and
Mhm.
it just makes me think that the cycle's going to continue.
Well, exactly.
And it will if we don't properly treat them accordingly because, they're growing up with this damaged brain and then they're having kids and then those kids are learning from generational
Trauma.
trauma and the cycle just continues. And I think this is why we're so passionate about having this resource at our fingertips. And I agree, not everyone's going to have access to it. However, you can stop generational trauma now.
Mhm.
Even if you feel well, I love the call out of like, just go get your brain scanned just to see how you're doing.
Well, even if it's not the brain scan, because you said you don't need the brain scan, you need somebody who's good at their job. But even if that's not accessible,
Totally.
I have cruised the website and there are so many resources for people to do right now at home that if
Mhm.
they took the time and energy to explore
Right.
and actually adopt them, you could help do that. You could help your brain just by simply doing a few of the things that are suggested on the good old blog, which is free 90 free.
Free 90 free. And Dr. Anderson, you are a father of 3.
I am.
And as we were, looking over your bio, we noticed that one of your kiddos experiences anxiety and also has ADHD. So, can you talk to us from now, like a parent point of view, with the
Mhm.
knowledge that you have in the work that you do around how you support your kiddo at home that isn't potentially the traditional way? Traditional way is ignoring it and just pretending like he's gonna or she's gonna outgrow it.
Mhm.
How do you support or like, what's practical advice that you can give other families that also have kiddos with similar conditions?
But aren't a doctor.
Correct.
Well, first off, I say be patient with yourself as a parent because even as a child psychiatrist, right, even as a doctor, I am by far and away a perfect parent.
You lose
You
your
know,
shit too, is what you're saying.
I mean, I grew up. My sister and I grew up raised by a single dad, ex-marine. He was a
Mm,
yeller. He wasn't a hitter, but man, he was a yeller and a sweat every day. Like that's something that I'm conscious about because if I'm having a bad day, if my temper gets a hold of me, yes, my voice can sometimes go up, right, and that's not helpful. Um, but again, I'm not perfect, right? And as parents, we have to remember that there's no such thing as a perfect parent. One of my favorite books ideas is kind of the good enough parent. Like there really is this idea that like you don't have to be a perfect parent to be a good parent. I think one of the best things that we can do is to be present. So being present with our kids, which means when we write, whether they have anxiety or ADHD or not, is when we're at home with our kids, um, being able to putting our phone down, being able to stop and give them a little bit of genuine time, to uh, and that alone can go so far. Just your kids knowing that you are like you that you're there, and that when you're there and you're with them, like you're with them, which can be very hard to do when there's laundry that needs to be done and this bill needs to get paid and grocery shopping and oh we got to make dinner, right? We live in a really busy world. A lot of families, both parents are working, sometimes more than one job. It costs way too much. The only thing that doesn't going up in our country cost wise is wages, right? So we don't unfortunately in today's day and age we don't really, most of us don't get the opportunity to kind of live that traditional American dream that we all grew up thinking about. But we can still take moments, small amounts of time in our day when we're at home with our children to be present with our children. And I think that is huge. I also think giving honest, constructive, specific feedback and praise for
Say
things
it
can be
again.
really
Say it
helpful.
again. Yes.
Right. Honest, specific, constructive feedback and praise, right, is huge. And both ways. So praising them for things that they are doing well in a very honest and in specific way that shows that you aren't just like, oh, good job, Timmy. That's great. Okay, cool. Now back to Facebook,
Yeah.
or whatever it is today. So it used to be MySpace, but I don't think.
You're probably right with the parents. It could be a little Instagram, but Facebook's still up there depending on the
Yeah.
age.
That's the only one I have. I check it like once or twice a week. I don't know. I think that's been the other thing that's kept me from diving down the podcast. I'm like, oh, I have to get more involved in social media.
We get it.
It is a game.
It is a full-time job.
Yeah, seriously. But going back to what you were saying, I think that can be helpful. And then the other way too, like when there are things that you want your kids to do, right? Instead of just stop that, don't do that, blah, 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 which is easy to do. But to stop and say, well, don't do that, and here's why. Right? We need to remember that parents are teachers too. Our job is to not just tell our children not to do something or to do something, but to help them understand why it's important. Right? That way they don't go through life just waiting for other people to tell them to do or not do the next thing, because that's just promoting learned helplessness, and that's not helping them grow into the independent, autonomous adult that you hopefully want them to be.
Right.
So we have to be teaching our kiddos. And then I think specifically when we think about the ADHD or the anxiety or those types of things, like you said earlier, not just ignoring it and pretending that it doesn't exist, not just also just putting it all on the kid, and because children are a product of their environment. So if there is anxiety in a kiddo, ADHD, trying to think about, well, what can we as a household do? What can I as a parent do? How can we kind of work to create a more harmonious environment that's more conducive to less anxiety and better outcomes? So really working as a team with our children to help them figure it out, and realizing that we might as parents actually have to put some work into and not just expect some medication or some therapy or something to just fix our kid, right? That's another big one. And then just patience with ourselves and patience for our child, right? If we can be present, if we can be patient, and if we can be open, that is going to create a dynamic of trust and understanding to where our children can feel comfortable coming to us and telling us how they feel without there being a lot of judgment or judgment or punishment or anything else. Because unless we really know how our children are doing, then it's how are we supposed to help them the best way we can. So I think those are big places to start.
Awesome.
Gosh, and they're not, again, no pun intended, it's not rocket science.
No, it's
right.
not.
They're very doable things. And when we first started this conversation, there was a comment made about like the hustle culture that we're in as Americans. Like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I'm really happy I don't do that. I'll probably take a nap here in about an hour and a half once Jill leaves. Big sleeper. Love me a good nap. So it's funny because we wear that as a badge of honor, right? How hard can I go? How much can I grind? And you saying those things around creating an environment, and really it's a same team mentality. You have to get on the same team as your child and not blame them for what's going on, but really take responsibility for what's going on, as well as figuring out the solution. And to me, what you just said is figuring out the solution really makes people slow down. We have to slow down in order to find out what's going on and then figure out a path forward for all of us to be able to live harmoniously. Because if something is off in one of the members of the family, then we're not in harmony anymore. And in order for us to continue on in a way that's conducive for all of us to feel harmonious together, we have to help the person who is struggling. And along the way, you might just find out that you're also struggling with something that you didn't know you had. Because is ADHD or ADD, is that passed down is that genetic? Is that environmental? Is it both? Like, do you find that a lot of the kids that you work with also have parents that go undiagnosed with either one of these things as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and yeah, there's, a lot of evidence out there. It's no secret that for a vast majority of psychiatric illness, there's a genetics
Component.
are at play. Now, there's absolutely the idea of nature and nurture, right? Certainly, we know that genetics are not usually not by themselves enough to always cause something. Now, that's not always the case, but the combination of genetics and environment and upbringing and situational things, right, can are cause a perfect storm, so to speak. But yes, I see ADHD in families all the time. I have seen many uh, parents bring their child in for an ADHD evaluation, and the parent is absolutely. I mean, I can just watch and I can see it unfold. I'm like, oh yeah, well, yeah, mom's got ADHD too, right? It was never diagnosed, and a lot of that's because, well, when they were a kid, the awareness wasn't there, the diagnosis wasn't there, and I think we as a culture overall have come a long ways in recognizing mental illness and being willing to accept it and be open to the idea of it and talk about it. Now, even in the younger generations, and you know, there's there can be still a lot of stigma against it, and certainly I think in the older generations, I've heard, I can't tell you how many patients and people I know. Oh yeah, my mom and dad, they were old, they were old school. You didn't talk about your depression, you didn't talk about anxiety, you didn't talk about any of that.
Right.
You just kind of stuffed it down.
Swept it under the rug.
You swept it under the rug with a
Hmm.
combination of workaholism and alcoholism,
Mm,
and just it never got talked about, right? Well, that obviously doesn't work. That's not a good way to handle our problems.
right.
But if you were raised in that, if you were raised in that type of household and now you've got children of your own, it might be very difficult for you, even though you are trying your hardest and you want what's best for your child. It may be, as a product of your own upbringing, very difficult to talk about these things. And it may feel very uncomfortable and it may be really hard. And it may even bring up things in you that you've tried to kind of dissociate from and sweep under
Hmm.
the rug, right? That have happened, or it, and it can sometimes bring up a lot of our own trauma. And we have to be willing as parents, if we really want to do what's best not only for our children but for ourselves, we have to be willing to recognize that if it does come up and say, you know what, maybe one of the best things I can do to help my child is to go get my own help,
Mm. I mean,
right?
mic drop on that
Yeah,
statement.
it is so important. And we're now in a society where we are embracing that
Mhm.
everyone needs somebody to talk to. I think it's critical. It's critical because it's coming at the cost of our children's childhood. And I know parents who maybe had a harder childhood is like, I don't want to give that to my kids. So it's our due diligence to put the work in so our kids can also see, hey, mom and dad are doing the work too, right
Mhm.
alongside you. I think
Yeah.
it's a beautiful call out.
It is, and it's very cool to see. And I know we have a long way to go, obviously. There's so much left as a culture that we have to explore, but it has come such a long way since we've seen the good old egg in the frying pan, right? To really that's our one example of what mental health looks like. And there's terms we can't use anymore.
Well,
You don't just call somebody crazy. There used
Right.
to be the hand signal. I haven't seen anybody do that in such a long time now that we're having this conversation, right? The around the brain, like it's
oh
this,
yeah.
like we now
Hmm.
know that there's something that person needs help with, as opposed to just pointing and laughing or writing them off as crazy Uncle Jerry. Like, we now have resources to be able to give to that person or direct them to someone to get
Mhm.
them the help that they need, so they're not suffering
Right.
alone. And the fact that that is so out in the open really does give permission to a lot of people, including the younger generation, to talk openly about it, which isn't something that Jill and I really experienced growing up ourselves. So in a very short amount of time, the book has been opened, which is
Mhm.
very cool.
Well, and to that point, we have discovered personal growth and development, which has allowed us to really start to look at ourselves in a different way and unpack how we were raised, but also in tandem say, hey, why don't you go talk to somebody about that? Yeah, there's only so much self-reflection you can do, and it's okay to go and seek out professional help and other resources to support you in moving through the trauma and the past so that it doesn't meet you where you are today.
God,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
stop
Yeah.
you from what you're
Literally.
meant to do,
Right.
because it is debilitating. It's absolutely
Mhm.
debilitating.
Mhm.
Dr. Amen told us a story at the grand opening of a patient that he had whose mom brought him in, and he just had a hard time living, and he'd seen doctor after doctor, probably got medicated and thrown band-aids, if you will, at,
Mhm.
and he sat him down, shot him straight, said, I want to help you. I think I can, but you need to get on board as well. Like, you need to also follow the protocol. And I mean, lo and behold, he got him on some supplements, wrote out some sort of a plan for him to follow. And the guy calls or stops in 3 months later and is a totally different person, like actually has control of his brain, and just was so thankful for Doc Amen seeing that in him. So I imagine that you get to work with and see cases like that often, of people who have just suffered and suffered and suffered and haven't found an answer, and boom, they happen upon the clinic, they happen upon you and the team, and you extend that solution to them, and it's not something they've heard before. Because typically as a society, we've also just been closed off to non-traditional quote unquote things. So we're talking about holistic measures here, and that can be like witchcraft and
Hippies.
wizardry.
Yeah.
Freaking hippies, man.
Right. So it's
Just go roll around in the grass. You'll be fine.
take some of this.
We'll burn some sage, some
It's
Reiki
all good.
crystals.
Yeah. Just get your Palo Santo and your
Crush up
problems
some
will
dandelion.
your problems
Right.
will disappear.
But you know what's so funny about that is, I've asked people, so do you guys do? I've had that. So are you guys like a place that'll do like Reiki crystals, or you'll do like that kind of stuff? Because I just think that's bullcrap. And I'll say, you know what? Honestly, I'm not a crystal practitioner. But I can't. So I don't know if it works or not from that respect. Like, I don't know if aligning your chakras is a thing or not necessarily a thing. However, I will say that if I tell you that a sugar pill is going to help you feel better, and you take that sugar pill, odds are you will feel better. And that is, that feeling is measurable. We call that the placebo effect, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Now, I think that just because we don't understand something and we can't measure something with the tools that we have doesn't mean that it's not real or it doesn't work. So I am not here trying, like, bagging on any of that stuff. In fact, I work at the Amen Clinic because I'm a believer that there's a lot more that we can be doing outside of just pills and pills to help people feel better. But even if that's not the case, if it helps, if it helps them feel better in some way and it brings them some relief or comfort to burn some sage, or to have a salt crystal lamp on their desk, or whatever it may be, well, then why would we stand in the way of that?
100%.
Because
You
we don't
call it
understand
placebo.
it.
I'm that person.
Yeah, Jill, the crystal queen she is loving.
But I will say there are other really incredible modalities, but it's not going to solve your deep rooted problems.
Yeah.
It's in parallel with getting the right help versus like the self-diagnosis. I can jump on WebMD. I can go on TikTok and totally go down a rabbit hole and be like, well, I have this problem and now I'm going to do all my other weird stuff
The
to make me
best
feel
one
better.
I've ever seen was, my beard itches. Jump on WebMD. Oh God, I have beard cancer, right? So the self-diagnosis,
Yeah.
especially in Gen Z and Gen Alpha, what we're
Mhm.
seeing right now, TikTok is a plethora of incredible information. It really has allowed people to take the news story back from the professional journalist, which I think is a good thing as well as a terrible thing, because we can take something for face value and
Right.
diagnose ourselves with something that has nothing to do with what we actually have and live that as our truth.
Right.
And you had a major eye roll and a big shake your head at that statement.
I
So
just,
I'd love to sit there for a minute.
it's well as a physician, right? And I mean, I could spend all day going on about everything political and blah blah blah, and turn this into one of those things. And I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like a migraine that I don't want to deal with.
Yeah,
But
we'll skip
but
that for another
but I,
time.
but what I will say, and I do think that, right, that vaccines are a really good example of this. Regardless of whether you believe in them or not, whatever, that's not the point. Um, as a doctor, I have, like, we go to school, we have a lot of training, we learn a lot, we do a lot, and then it does bother me sometimes to have my opinion or the opinion of many physicians be usurped by a social media influencer who, who I don't know, did they even graduate high school? I don't know if they what they know about it,
Right.
and it's just this idea that, like, there's a lot of information out there, right? And that's not a bad thing, right? We don't want to close off information to the public because, well, that's freedom, and we want that. But we have to be able to figure out how to validate our information before we act on it. We don't do a very good job of that. We see something on TikTok, somebody sells something, right? Adolf Hitler was a hell of a speaker. That's how one of the ways he was able to take power. People can sell you all sorts of evil and make it sound really great. And we have to be better as a society for our mental health, for our physical health, at stopping and taking a critical look at the information that's being fed to us on social media, regular media, etc., and appraising that for what it really is before we act on it. And I think if we could start to be able to do that as a society, we would see a huge decrease in a whole lot of problems that we have in our culture, and a lot of which are mental health related. We just, there's too much coming at us. There's too much stimulation. There's too much information, and we as a society are not good at stopping to take the time to really look at it for what it is, whether that be truth or complete and utter bullshit.
Totally. Well, you tied this episode up with a beautiful bow.
Yeah.
Because that's it. I think as consumers, we live in such a consumer-based society. That is such a beautiful takeaway, in addition to so many other golden nuggets that came from this episode. Truly, Dr. Anderson, thank you for your time. We know your time is valuable. And listeners, we're going to put all of his information, the clinic's information, in the show notes. And do yourself a favor. Check out the Amen Clinic, but also do what Mary said earlier in the episode. Look at their free resources. Truly, it can help you, and it's a game changer if you are a parent as well, with just questioning a lot of things. So,
well, and honestly, we have a few books, so we might do a book giveaway for this particular episode, because we have a couple of Dr. Amen's books that are incredibly helpful as well. So,
yeah.
And I'm a big bibliotherapy type guy, and so if there's, from our parents out there, for our people who are listening, a couple of book recommendations that I would give, for anybody who struggles with self-doubt or deals with depression and anxiety, and those constant feelings of, like, it's not enough, I'm not enough. There's a book called The Gap in the Game. The author's name is escaping me right now, despite my best effort to remember it.
That's okay. We'll put it in our show notes.
We'll put it in the show notes.
And it's a beautiful book that's basically trying to help us stop focusing all of our attention and our energy on what we want and what's going to make us happy in the future, because that's always a moving target, and start looking and focusing more on how far we've come.
Mhm.
right? Living in the gain, not in the gap.
Love that.
An amazing book that I think everybody should pick up and at least thumb through while they're sitting on the toilet.
I mean, honestly, it feels
Hey,
like
potty reading is good reading. I
It
don't care
is.
what anyone says.
Potty reading is good reading. I know.
I feel like honestly, Dr. Anderson is on staff at Girls Mentorship because
100%.
so much of what we talked about in this last 49 minutes is just reinforcing what we preach with the families that we work with. So thank you for not only providing ways to validate what's going on in families across the United States, but also validating that we're on the right track and we're doing the right thing to serve our communities and the girls that we once were.
And and I think a big round of applause to you guys for taking the time and putting in the work to get messages like this out there, to speak to people, goofy guys like me that might have something to say, and everybody else, and just really trying to send a message of hope and love and inspiration out there. You guys are doing such amazing work, so thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to do it again. So be prepared
Good.
for another email exchange.
Part 2.
Y'all, thank you for listening.
I'm DTP at Down to Podcast.
Down to Podcast. I love it. On that note, we're kicking y'all out and we'll plan our next podcast after this. So we'll see y'all later on the next episode of What's the Lesson.
Bye, everyone.
Good. Bye, guys.